everyone, Ivy Lee Gaming here, and today we're playing Dragonheir Silent Gods. For today's video, we're going to talk about Elemental Affinity for Season 1 specifically. We're going to talk Team Synergy, the best heroes, who should you be using in a more budget-friendly, non-legendary conversation for Ice and Necrotic. Alright, so this video is the first of 3 videos that I will post going over each of the different elemental affinity synergies for Season 1 of Dragonheir. They do change every season, so you wouldn't be pairing the same heroes up for the next. So what my plan is, we're going to go Ice and Necrotic today, and we are going to talk about which characters from, which heroes from those elements best fulfill their roles, like the best tanks to choose, the best whatever to choose, and even the more niche roles like summoners versus frost heroes. And then how would you build a good Vortex team, for example? Like, what are the elements you're going to use for different team combinations and who are best at those roles? So I'm going to try my best to go through this at an organized manner, but it might get a little messy, but I'm going to try my best. So, Ice and Necrotic. This is a hard elemental synergy for Season 1. And it wasn't until the very end of the season that, credit where credit is due, Odd One really noticed an extra strong hero in actually Necrotic that surprised us for support. So if it wasn't for this guy, I don't think I would have got some of the damages I got out of my final endgame content. So we're going to kind of break all that down and talk about some different stuff. So first, let's just talk about tanks, right? Let's talk about defensive heroes. When it comes to the Frost, you're going to only probably use Dalbum in Arena, honestly. He does have this blind, which is cool, and he has this thing where he doesn't really die. He has that bonus invincibility, helps him last long. But the good thing is you don't really have to build him fully for that, because you just have everyone else go up to the highest level of your highest character on your account. I do know some people really like Elvis. He is interesting, and I think he can actually do some damage too. And he also has this recharge speed penalty. This is really helpful. I don't really see myself using him over some of the other options. And the rares are kind of meh. You could use Loris if you're pretty desperate, I think, for attack penalty too. Because at least he has a 100% chance to land it. So if attack penalty 2 is something you're missing from your team for synergy, which every team should have an attack penalty 2 in it of some extent, you might actually end up using Loris as your tank. It sounds weird, but hey, it helps. And then yeah, he has a little bit of crowd control with the taunt and frozen along the way, but he's really great if you need that for that element. You're not getting it from someone else. There's not a lot of people that do that. As far as the other tanks go, Irma is really cool for control effect prevention and to boost or reduce the damage your allies take, but they do need to be close to her. Keep in mind her formation, they need to be close to her in order to take advantage of that properly. And then she does gain a little bit of extra, like, she gets some ultimate energy boost and then has some hit recovery, blah, blah, blah. So she's okay for some of the endgame content, like the Continental Challenge and Chaos Shadow bosses, as well as this passive making her pretty decent for the endgame Resurgent Dragon. She's pretty solid against the Ripicos boss as well. Or no, not Ripicos, sorry, Bion Frey for the Continental Challenges with the Frost team or Ice team synergy. Alright, and then, but really, I think my favorite's probably Fitz as far as all the tanks for this synergy goes. He is going to just bring so much. He is a debuffer in an interesting sense, right? So he, of course, you want to build him with a ton of HP, but also resistance. So he has this transfers all allies debuffs to himself, which is Sounds bad at first, but if you build him with the resistance, then he doesn't actually do that. So however much resistance you need for that battle, which is usually, a bit more than the accuracy, he can actually just tank all that. Oh, excuse me. And it makes him a full debuff cleanser, not just one or two, all of them. So he's amazing for cleansing debuffs anywhere you need to. Grave of Rot. Oh god, I mean, like, there's spots in, I guess, some of the weird, like, Ooze Monster, Lady of Greeneries, debuffs for the Flame Domain, and of course the Endgame Resurgent Dragon. If you don't have a debuff prevention, which we're going to talk about, he can be the one to cleanse and get rid of all 3 debuffs after the boss passes 50%. So Fitz is just an amazing defender that's worth maxing out early on to help you push hard stuff like the Flame Domain, but then you can totally use him in the very end game as well. And along with this synergy here and that kind of idea, let's go to our support heroes because we have to talk about Galadros. So in the same role where Fitz is really good as a tank because of his additional utility with dealing with debuffs, we have Galadros here who puts up debuff immunity on your whole team, although he's ranged. But in something like the Resurgent Dragon, you don't actually need a tank, which is really great. So he can kind of fulfill that role as well. Debuff immunity and shields. So he brings a lot as well. He steals attack, which is kind of funky. And then, yeah, it gives a little bit of a control immunity effect here that's kind of a little less exciting, but it's the debuff immunity. So, like, everywhere in the game, not everywhere. Again, I kind of mentioned the same things I'm talking about for Fitz. Anywhere where there's debuffs happening, you can prevent them in the first place. I think he's going to be extremely important in Season 2 for Vortex because Necrotic is going to pair with Fire. So that'll be another discussion, but if you max out your Galadros and you fully book him during Season 1, don't worry, I think he'll have a really good role in Season 2 as well. But I love, he was a game changer for the Resurgent Dragon because I found my Ice Adventurer dying too easily. And with him, you can build him with attack focus, but also max HP. So if you mix the build a little bit to add some survivability, and you're looking for as much attack as possible, but then also like HP substats or HP runes or something else to give him a little bit as well, he's going to survive, put up amazing shields that keeps your team alive, and, well, yeah, prevent the debuffs from happening in the first place, which is ideal, especially for that area of the game. But another hero that's amazing, if you got him early, you could absolutely use him throughout early game to end game as well. So the support characters are pretty quirky for both because there's not a lot. Where's our healing? Where's our real healers? Real healers, like truly great healers. Oh yeah, the legendary Guland. Freaking Tauren, he's got crazy stuff, right? That's not what we're talking about today. So what we are going to talk about is using our girl Megan. If you are looking for support, Megan is such a clutch hero. Again, from the early game through the end game. She puts up some protection with defense up. She gives recovery over time, which does allow you to heal. She does heal with her battle skills, so something like the needle or the candle are really good for her. And recharges ultimate energy, so I love this. She's like a perfect candidate for the epic candle artifact, and she could be amazing for a team. And she also has this defense penalty that is or dispelling defense penalty, which is really important for Vortex. Once you get to, like, what is it, 4, the final stage of Vortex, the boss puts up defense penalties, so you can use Megan to cleanse right after that happens, right before the boss does their ultimate. And you could also use her for the same thing in your Grave of Venom with the, I think it's the little add things, add defense penalty, and she can be the one to cleanse. You can stick her in a corner at a low level. She doesn't even have to be high level because it's just for the sake of, like, this buff here doesn't really, she doesn't need anything special. This just happens every time she casts a skill. And this is based on the target's HP. Nothing is based on her HP, her attack, her anything. So you can actually keep her at really low levels, just stick her in the corner in like a Grave of Venom battle, and she will help keep your team alive. And yeah, a really, really good asset for a lot of early game pushing, and she'll be huge for end game content as well. You definitely can use her through all the end game, otherworld exploration, and the Resurgent Dragon. And as far as other healers go, everything's kind of quirky. I know some people, let's see, Estella kind of has this single target stuff, not as ideal, but it does really keep one person alive pretty well. But really, I like the combination of Zarloth, who has this attack-based heal with every 4th basic attack. So you want to give him a bunch of attack speed for that. And then he has a heal here on his ultimate as well based on his attacks. So he's a really good hero to give a good attack speed and skill haste and make sure he's going often, but also built with damage because he actually smacks. He can kind of do everything, and just like a Voresh. Voresh is my favorite epic in the game still. I still think no one else is really close to him. I would much prefer Voresh #1 over any other epic out of the box. No questions asked still. I'm sorry, not sorry. But he has this passive where he heals the ally with the lowest HP whenever he deals damage, which is going to be a lot. And also that, of course, he brings a lot of other utility with his buff prohibition and dispelling debuffs as well. And he hits multiple times, making him a great candidate for Witch's Remains or the Crown of the Unclean Artifacts. Really, really strong hero. So let's say you're building that initial team for just pushing content. Zarloth and Voresh are going to be amazing for clearing anything with waves. They're going to bring you damage, and they're going to bring you support and healing and wonderful debuffs as well. Zarloth can bring some crowd control and debuffs. Really cool hero, and definitely one you're going to want to use. When it comes to like other support or damage, I would say Questa is listed as support, but she's a DPS. This is in this game, sometimes offensive support is the thing, and she can smack. I found Questa really, really valuable in the end game content for like otherworld exploration and the end game dragon for Resurgent Dragon because she self-heals as well. She brings attack penalty, which is huge. She heals the other allies. Like if she kills something, she heals or grants the buff to all allies. She can really be great. Obviously, she's a very strong arena assassin, a single target nuker in arena that can keep herself alive pretty well too and help your team. But those are kind of the key people I think as part of team compositions that you're really going to use in like any team as far as not specific stuff goes, I guess. The other shout could be Thea. Thea's a really cool shout here for healing prohibition if you need that for this role, although it's not 100% chance to land, so not ideal. But she does put invisibility on heroes, and then if they're under invisibility, she heals them, as well as the ally with the lowest HP. So, alright, so what we really need to talk about now is the different special things, right? So let's say you are pushing content and you got Tio, he's great. You've got Joyce, who's great. And maybe you were really lucky and you pulled a Premsa, or Luanis, or someone else that is going to be a good summoner. Keep in mind, summoners are not the best for Vortex. Joyce is someone that can be used in a lot of comps, even if you're not using other summoners. He does bring this Phantom, which up to 3 can exist at the same time, which are like clones of himself. They're better than the average summon, so it's kind of a fun one. But if you have Zadok, he's kind of annoying because annoying not in a good way for you, just in an annoying way for you. He has this very specific range. He shoots ahead. He does not twist to do his ultimate. So you really have to place him properly. But his passive is actually pretty good here. I know I've heard other people talk about using Zadok because of his passive alongside of Luanis. So again, I feel like summoners are not one of those things you would build a team around unless you got a good legendary. Or 2, like Luanis and someone, or Urzilis and Premsa, and then you wanted to fill the roles. For the other summoner, the best one is honestly Tio to mention. Even if you're not doing a summon team, Tio brings 30% attack aura to your team. So ice or necrotic, doesn't matter which one you're actually focusing for the DPS, or if you're using a team synergy with summoners or not. He could go in any team where you're looking for some AoE damage. He brings a pretty good smack here, and he brings AoE on 2 skills, which is really helpful for like Goblin early on. Tio plus Voresh and Zarloth would be amazing, like, for example, as some AoE people to start off with as you start to push in the Goblin domain or dungeons. All right, and then I think we have to talk about the more obvious, better thing with Frost. So we obviously have our girl Usha, who is our Frosty Queen. She's great to be a tank, to focus for Goblin runs, to make them all cluster around her, and then your other AoE people do their damage, and they actually hit everybody. She's really great for that role. You don't really need to build her too tanky to do that. It's usually pretty easy later on. But you can build her with a little bit of survivability for that role, or just a different artifact that helps keep her alive. But she has a massive damage, so when enemies are under frost, she does double damage. So this already hits twice for 800, then you double that to 1600% damage. It's crazy, it really is, but it's only what's right in front of her for one. And it's not too big of a range, but still pretty great, honestly. But you definitely need other Frost enablers in your team. So as part of a really strong team comp with Frost, I would best suggest, whereas Shirava for that role. Pairs well, brings crit damage in all battles aura, which will help Usha do even more damage. Really helps to keep Frost up very often, but does fires 3 orbs with the battle skill. And has an AoE here as well, where they put a Nexus. And then over time, for 10 seconds, will constantly be pumping out lots of Frost. So Rava's a really good shout. Or if you get Dorkaraz, he's really good. I would say that Vidimir can be amazing for damage and really surprise me, and even things like Arena. But you don't really want to pair him with Usha because he's kind of exploding the Frost and getting rid of it. So if anything, if he's part of your team, you definitely want to synergize to where Usha goes before Vidimir, so she smashes before he removes the Frost in the first place, or else that would be really bad if he goes before her. So you definitely, if you're going to use Vidimir as a Frost hero and Usha in the same team, you have to tune them to where Usha always goes before him, and someone else making sure that Frost is placed if he's not already doing so. I mean, he's got it on the battle skill as well, so it depends on your timings, but it's something you have to be aware of. Also, Gardas is pretty strong in many areas of the game, dungeons or arena. He brings a ton of crowd control, recharging speed penalty, knock up, knock back, stun. He's doing it all. And he even brings attack penalty too on his battle skill. So a really good hero that a lot of people I feel slept on this season, but he was used very highly in Season 0. Oh, okay, now we've talked about everything kind of about what's going to synergize together. I just want to kind of also talk quickly about remembering, just because you've got a couple Frost heroes doesn't mean you can't add in something else. Like if you have a couple Frost heroes and then you add in Zarloth for either his debuffs or just for the heals, he can be pretty great too. He's going to bring an attack aura. It doesn't have to be like all Frost or all summoners, but obviously with those 2 or 3 DPS that synergize together are important, so keep that in mind. But you can definitely use people for different roles. I think Zarloth is a really fun one to give as an example of fitting into any team with Ice and Necrotic, just like I would Voresh as well. All right, so let's end this discussion of elemental synergy for Ice and Necrotic with, if you have a good option of heroes to choose from, let's not talk any legendaries, what would you make for a Vortex team? The big old Vortex team, number one, I already said it, summons are not good. You don't want to use or don't want to worry about summons, relying on summons for Vortex, because they just die. They're too squishy, they just die. So unfortunately, someone like a Tio that does like a summon explosion would be really bad for Vortex because he's just not gonna, you know, there's not gonna be any summons left to explode. But someone like a Joyce could be used because they actually do pump out a decent bit of damage just period, so you might get away with using them instead. I think overall, you're kind of better to go Frost. Out of all this synergy here, you're best to go Frost for Vortex. I would say, again, Usha with Rava would be great. Luckily in Vortex, it doesn't really matter ranged or not ranged, melee, whatever. Vortex is less so of a care for that, right? So there also is Olgon. He could be a great mix with them too, especially for something like Vortex. He's going to bring a ton of Frost and Frozen. And he puts attack up for all allies, so he could boost your allies as well in close range, which when you're doing Vortex runs, you are in close range, so keep that in mind. And if you're early on and you're having trouble getting the accuracy you need to land debuffs, he's got a 40 in all battles aura, so he's a really good shout to synergize. So if you were going to go DPS, let's say you had Usha, oh god, this is hard because then we have to think of attack penalty. Let me make sure I don't forget it. Let me make sure I don't forget attack penalty debuff. Okay. You could probably use Megan as a healer. Usha, Rava, and maybe Olgon or someone else as a DPS. And then maybe Loris actually as a tank. You really don't need you don't need a tank per se in Vortex, but you need someone to put down attack penalty. And you need someone that you can time with 100% chance to land attack penalty on an ultimate. And he's one of the only people that can do that for this faction group. So you actually could build Loris to make sure he is always going with attack penalty like before the boss goes, right? And then if you had Megan as a healer, let's get rid of our swords here. If Megan was your healer, she could actually also help you with the passive for the defense penalties. So that might be a really good synergy. The higher up stages, though, Megan might not be enough as the only healer. You might have to work in something else, or more support like Gladros. This could be the other option. You could do Megan for a little bit of support, but then she's going to boost ultimate energy. It might mess up some of your runs. Like, there's so much to consider when it comes to Vortex that you kind of want consistency. So he might even be better. The problem just is it's a faction really lacking healing. So at the end of the day, I would probably choose not to go with Ice and Necrotic for a Vortex team only. Unless you've got some endgame options, honestly. You could use Zarloth, I would say. Okay, I guess, what? Zarloth and Gladros. Gladros will bring shields and protection. He could prevent the debuff from happening in the first place, right? That could be okay. And then you could put a couple Frost heroes in for the main DPS. And Zarloth would also bring some damage and bring healing. Like, that could work. You wouldn't need a proper tank. Or you'd still want you could get away with the defense penalty landing for stage 4. How does it affect your survivability? Can you last long and still put out good damage, or do you really need that attack penalty? Which, if you do, I really just think this elemental synergy is so limited. Loris is probably your best way to go, unless you're able to use. I guess the other option would be Questa as well for attack penalty, but it's only on her battle skill, so not up consistently. But she could be another DPS option if you didn't want to worry about your synergies with Frost and having enough people doing Frost and having to place the debuffs. You could just go specific DPS, and you could go Questa, who's going to bring you extra stuff here, heals and attack penalty. You could go Zarloth and someone else who does good single target, maybe like Joyce actually hits really hard. I've seen Joyce use, like I said. You could even play around with other people like Thea and give her a damage build. She actually does pretty good damage here on her ultimate, so you just kind of got to experiment, and this is a hard one to work out. But I hope this discussion was helpful, guys. We're going to do the same thing for the other elements, which luckily Some of those are a little bit better for Vortex to talk about. But that's all for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.